My name is Vivienne Cross, and I want to tell you something that took me 2 years to be ready to say out loud. My husband and my best friend betrayed me. Not in the way you find out in movies, loud and dramatic and obvious. In the quiet way. The kind that makes you question your own memory. That makes you wonder if you imagined the whole thing. I didn't imagine it. I found out on a Tuesday. I smiled, said nothing, and waited. I waited for 11 months. And on the day they stood in front of everyone they loved and said their vows, I was there. With an envelope. And what was inside that envelope didn't just ruin their wedding day. It changed everything that came after. Before I tell you what was in that envelope, take a second to like and subscribe. But only if stories about women who choose patience over panic, strategy over screaming, and truth over silence mean something to you. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand what I had before you can understand what they took. I met Marcus Cross at 26. He was 30. An architect. The kind of man who moved through spaces like he'd already decided where the furniture should go. Confident without being loud about it. Attractive in the particular way that men are attractive when they don't seem to be working at it. We met at a gallery opening that I almost didn't go to. I had been exhausted that week. I was working as a brand consultant for a mid-sized agency, building something steadily, and my friend had dragged me out with the specific insistence of someone who knew I needed to be dragged. Marcus introduced himself by disagreeing with something I said about a painting. I said the composition was too calculated. He said calculated wasn't a criticism if the calculation was in service of something honest. We talked for 3 hours. He called the next day. We dated for 18 months, and they were genuinely good months. Not performed good. Actually good in the way that new love is good when the person you're with is curious about you, and makes you feel seen and says things that make you lean forward slightly, toward them, without meaning to. I introduced him to Jade at about the 8-month mark. Jade Holloway had been my best friend for 11 years. I want you to understand what 11 years means. Jade was the friend I called from the hospital parking lot when my mother had her first health scare. She was the friend who showed up at my door with wine and bad movies when I got passed over for a promotion I deserved. She was the person who knew, before I fully admitted it to myself, that a relationship I was in 2 years before Marcus was slowly diminishing me, and she told me so clearly, without cruelty, in the way that only someone who genuinely loves you can tell you hard things. She was the sister I chose. She was funny and warm and had a loud laugh that made strangers in restaurants smile. She could talk to anyone. She remembered everything. Your birthday, your niece's name, the name of the teacher who had been unkind to you in 4th grade, and who she would, 20 years later, still describe as a villain without prompting. She was, of all the people in my world, the one I would have taken a bullet for. She met Marcus, and the 3 of us had a long dinner, and everyone laughed, and I drove home thinking, this is what a life looks like when it's going right. Marcus and I got engaged 14 months later. Jade was the first person I told. She screamed, literally screamed, in a coffee shop and grabbed both my hands across the table and said, I knew it. I knew from the second I met him. You two are supposed to be each other's. She held my hands for a long time. I am so happy for you, Viv. I mean that with everything. I believed her. I had every reason to believe her. We got married on a September afternoon. Jade was my maid of honor. She gave a speech that made half the room cry, and made Marcus put his arm around me and lean in and say something in my ear that I thought was the most romantic thing that had happened all day. 2 years of marriage. Solid, real, imperfect in the ordinary ways, work stress and communication lapses, and the occasional argument about nothing that was really about something, but fundamentally stable. Fundamentally ours. That's what I thought. What I was about to find out was that a different story had been running parallel to mine, in the spaces I wasn't looking. It started as a feeling. I want to be honest about that because I think women get dismissed when they describe intuition, and I also think intuition is real. It's the brain processing signals that the conscious mind hasn't organized into language yet. Something felt off. Not dramatically off. Just slightly. The way a room feels slightly different when someone has moved something an inch in your absence. Nothing you can point to. Everything exactly where it was. And yet, Marcus started checking his phone more. Not conspicuously, not hiding it under the table or turning it face down with guilty speed. Just more present with it than he used to be. A small, constant awareness of it that hadn't been there before. Jade started canceling plans. We had a standing Sunday brunch, the two of us, a ritual 11 years old. She canceled 3 in a row. Work, she said. Family stuff. Not feeling well. I accepted each one. Then I noticed they canceled on the same weeks. That was the signal the brain finally turned into language. Not proof, but a direction. I did not confront either of them. I want to explain this choice because I think it's the most important one I made in this entire story. My first instinct, the hot, immediate animal instinct, was to call them both. Demand, accuse, let the rage do what rage wants to do, which is make noise and break things and get the truth out through sheer force. But I had watched in my life what happened when people acted on that instinct. The confronted person denies. The accuser has no proof. The confronted person has time to manage the narrative. The accuser looks unstable. The confronted person emerges with sympathy. I had felt enough things get taken from me in my life. I was not going to let this one be taken too by acting before I was ready. So I did something else. I got quiet. And I started paying attention. The specific Tuesday I mentioned at the beginning came about 3 weeks after the feeling started. I had a meeting cancel. A client call, midday, that I'd had in my calendar for 2 weeks. Just gone. Client apology, reschedule, completely routine. I was working from home that day. I went to make coffee at around noon. I passed the hallway that led to Marcus's home office, a room he used on the days he worked remotely, which was 2 or 3 days a week. The door was slightly open. I wasn't trying to listen. I just heard his voice. She won't know. She trusts me completely. That's the problem and the advantage. A pause. A sound that was him laughing softly. A different kind of laugh than I knew from him. Looser. More private. I know. But Jade, I need you to be careful with your phone. I stood in the hallway. I didn't move. He kept talking. I heard her name 2 more times. I heard enough. I walked back to the kitchen. I made my coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, and I drank it. And in the space between one sip and the next, I made a decision that shaped everything that came after. I was going to know everything before I did anything. Everything. I am a brand consultant. What that means, at its most essential, is that I understand how narratives work, how stories are built, how perception is constructed, and how it can be shifted by the strategic introduction of information. I had spent 10 years doing this for other people's companies. I was about to do it for myself. The first thing I did was call my cousin Dara, who worked in financial services and knew things about asset protection and documentation that I didn't know, but suspected I needed to know. I told her a version of things, not the full picture, just enough to ask the right questions. If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, Dara said, after listening for 10 minutes, the first thing you do is make sure you have an independent picture of every shared financial asset, accounts, property, investments, everything, before anything changes. I did that, quietly, over several weeks. Every statement, every account, every piece of documentation that was in both our names or mine alone. I made copies. I stored them somewhere Marcus couldn't access. The second thing I did was hire a private investigator. I am aware of how that sounds. Dramatic. Something from a movie. It took me about 48 hours to get over how it sounded and understand that it was simply a tool, a way of knowing precisely what I was dealing with before I moved. His name was Roland. He came recommended by a colleague who had used him during a business dispute. Not for this purpose, but Roland was versatile and discreet, and that was all I needed him to be. I gave Roland 2 weeks. He gave me documentation. Photographs. Time-stamped. Locations. Text message records obtained through methods I didn't ask about too closely, but that were within the legal parameters he assured me of. Dates. Going back 7 months. 7 months. The affair had been going on for 7 months. I sat with Roland's folder in my car, in a parking garage, for about an hour. 7 months, which meant that when Jade and I had our last Sunday brunch, the one before the cancellation started, the one where she had told me she was so glad I had Marcus, that she had never seen me so settled, that she thought we were the most solid couple she knew, she had been sleeping with my husband for 4 months. 4 months of sitting across from me with her warm laugh and her remembered details and her genuine seeming love. 4 months of that. I drove home. Marcus was there. Making dinner, actually. Something that smelled good. He turned when I came in and smiled in the uncomplicated way of someone who has no idea the landscape has changed. "Good day," he said. "Productive," I said. I set my bag down. I sat at the kitchen island. I watched him cook. And I decided that I was not ready yet. Not because I wasn't certain. Roland's folder had made me certain. But because I had learned something sitting in that parking garage. I had learned that my grief was enormous and my anger was enormous. And if I let either of them drive this car right now, I would crash it in a way that left me worse off than the people who had done this to me. I was going to need time. And patience. And a plan. I started talking to a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she specialized in divorce and marital asset law, and she had the particular calm of someone who had heard every version of this story, and remained, through all of them, completely focused on outcomes. I gave her the full picture. The folder. The financial documentation I'd gathered. The timeline. She looked at everything and said, "You've done most of my job for me." "I want to know my position," I said. "Exactly." She told me. Our assets, the house, the shared investments, the savings were substantial. We had been married 2 years. The documentation of the affair mattered in our state's consideration of fault. The financial records I'd compiled showed everything clearly and honestly. "Your position is strong," she said. "But timing matters. The longer you wait, the more complex it can get if assets move." "I'm not waiting for financial reasons," I said. "I'm waiting for a different reason." She looked at me. "How long?" she asked. "I'll know when," I said. She nodded. "I'll have everything prepared so we can move quickly when you're ready." I left her office and I went home and I cooked dinner and I ate with my husband and I said normal things and I went to bed. I did this for weeks. I want you to understand the cost of this. People think patience in this context is cold, calculated, like you've stopped feeling. It was the opposite. Every ordinary evening was its own private endurance. Every time he touched my hand, every morning coffee, every how was your day. I was carrying the weight of what I knew like a stone in my chest, constant and heavy, while the surface of my life stayed smooth. I cried in the car a lot. I cried in the shower. I called Dara some nights and just talked about nothing, because I needed to hear a voice that loved me without agenda. But I did not break, because I had decided that when this ended, I was going to be standing up. And then I found out about the wedding. 4 months into my waiting, I was at a work event, a dinner for a client I'd held on to through all of this, because work was one of the places I could be entirely professional and focused and not feel the weight, when I ran into a woman named Cressida. Cressida was in the social orbit of both Marcus and Jade. Not a close friend of mine, but the kind of person you see at events and exchange genuine pleasantries with. She had clearly not been told to keep a secret. "Oh my God," she said, grabbing my arm. "Vivienne, have you heard about Jade and, well," she stopped. Something in her face shifted. "I'm sorry, this is probably Jade and Marcus?" I said. Her face went through several things. "You know," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't realize. I assumed you must have. How long has anyone else known?" I asked. My voice was perfectly steady. Cressida looked deeply uncomfortable. "I found out maybe 6 weeks ago, through mutual people. I think it's been an open secret in some circles." "Vivienne, I am so sorry. I should have." "It's okay," I said. "Cressida, what were you about to tell me?" She hesitated. "They're engaged," she said quietly. "Jade and Marcus. They got engaged last weekend. They're planning a wedding for next spring." I held my wine glass. Very steadily. "They're planning a wedding," I said. "I assumed you'd already filed. I assumed it was already." "I haven't filed yet," I said. We stood in that room and I felt the specific coldness of understanding the full picture for the first time. Not just an affair, not just betrayal, a plan. A future they had been building in the space I wasn't looking. With my husband, with my best friend, while I sat at dinner tables and made conversation and believed I knew what my life was. They were engaged. They were planning a wedding. In the spring. "Thank you for telling me," I said to Cressida. I finished my wine. I drove home, and I sat in my parked car outside my own house, and I felt, for the first time since the parking garage, something that wasn't grief, something clear and focused and almost quiet, because I had just found my moment. I called Patricia the next morning. "I'm ready," I said. "I'll begin preparing the filing," she said. "Not yet," I said. "I need to tell you about a new piece of information, and I need your guidance on timing." I told her about the engagement, the spring wedding. She was quiet for a moment. "You want to time the filing," she said. "I want to time specific parts of it," I said. "I want your guidance on what's possible and what's appropriate." What followed was the most strategic conversation I had ever had. Patricia walked me through it carefully, methodically, with the precision she applied to everything. What could be filed when? What had to happen before what? What the legal and ethical parameters were around timing? What I could and couldn't do. One thing I could do, completely legally, completely documentably, completely within my rights, was deliver a specific set of documents to a specific set of people at a time of my choosing. The divorce filing would happen through proper channels, properly served. But there was another document, a letter, that I could send wherever I chose, to whoever I chose, at whatever moment I chose. I wrote it in one sitting. Took me about 2 hours. Then I rewrote it. Then I read it to Dara on the phone and she said, very quietly, "Viv, this is perfect." I put it in an envelope. I put the envelope in a drawer. And I waited for the spring. I had filed for divorce in November. Marcus was served in the way these things are served, formally, through proper channels, no drama. He called me 20 minutes after being served, and his voice was the voice of someone who had been certain he had more time. "Vivienne, you should call Patricia's office if you have procedural questions," I said. "Her number is on the filing." "Vivienne, I want to." "Marcus," I said. "I found out in August. I've had 4 months of dinners and normal mornings to say everything I needed to say to myself. I don't have anything left to say to you." I hung up. He called back twice. I didn't answer. Jade called once. I let it ring. The divorce proceeded over the following months. Patricia had been right. My position was strong. The documentation was thorough. The settlement was fair and significantly in my favor in ways that reflected both the fault documentation and the asset records I had compiled. I was moving out of the house in February into a beautiful apartment, my own, chosen entirely by me, with rooms that had never held anyone's disappointment. The wedding was in April. I had heard through the peripheral network of mutual people. Cressida kept me updated, not out of malice, but out of the particular compulsion that surrounds these situations, that Jade and Marcus were proceeding. That the wedding was happening, that they had apparently decided the best approach was to simply move forward as though the rubble of what they'd done was not visible. Cressida also told me, slightly hesitantly, that several mutual friends had been invited to the wedding. I had not been. Obviously. Are you going? I asked Cressida. A very long pause. I haven't decided, she said. Go, I said. I want someone there. She was quiet. Viv, she said carefully. What are you planning? Nothing that isn't true, I said. She was quiet for another moment. Okay, she said. The wedding was on a Saturday in late April. The venue was a restored manor house about 40 minutes outside the city. I knew it because Jade had shown it to me years ago, when it was her dream venue, before she had decided to build her dream on the wreckage of mine. I did not attend. I want to be absolutely clear about that, because I think the word ruined in this story might have led you to expect something cinematic. Me walking into a church, standing up when the officiant asks if anyone objects. That is not what happened. What happened was this. On the morning of the wedding, a Saturday, I had the envelope hand-delivered. Not to the venue, not to Jade, not to Marcus, to 37 people. Every mutual friend who had been invited to that wedding received a copy in their personal email, obtained through Cressida, who had agreed that they deserved to know, at 8 a.m. on the morning of the ceremony. The envelope, the email in the digital version, contained 3 things. The first was the letter I had written and rewritten, not cruel, not ranting, clear, documented, factual in the way that only the truth can be factual, a precise, dignified account of what had happened. When the affair began, based on Roland's documented timeline, how long it had continued while I remained in the marriage believing in its honesty. The dates. The timeline, written not in rage, but in the steady voice of a woman who had had 8 months to find the words. The second thing was a single photograph. Roland had provided many. I chose one that was simply clear. That could not be denied or reframed or explained away. That told its own story in one image without commentary. The third thing was a short final paragraph that I want to read to you exactly as I wrote it. Because I spent the most time on this part and I want it to land the way I intended. I am not sending this to ask for anything. I am not asking you to choose sides or skip a wedding or perform loyalty. I am sending this because 2 people who are marrying today made choices that were made possible partly by a silence I maintained for months. I don't believe silence serves anyone anymore. You were my friends too. You deserve to know what kind of people are asking for your presence and celebration today. What you do with this information is entirely yours. I wish you all well. That was it. No dramatic ultimatum. No theater. Just the truth, delivered at the moment when it would land with maximum clarity and minimum ability to be dismissed. I know what happened at the wedding because Cressida called me from the parking lot of the venue at 11:15 a.m. She said, Viv, you have to know what's happening here. I said, tell me. Half the guests received your email before they left the house this morning, she said. Her voice was low, slightly stunned. People have been arriving, and there's a whole thing happening in the parking lot. People calling each other, groups standing around with their phones. Some people didn't come at all. I sat in my apartment. What about Marcus and Jade? I asked. I don't know exactly. They're inside. But one of the ushers, James, you know James, he went in and told them when he arrived. He said they should know before the ceremony started. A pause. Apparently there was a significant conversation inside. I could hear it from the courtyard. Are they getting married? I asked. I think so, Cressida said. I don't know. People are. Viv, their mothers are both here. Marcus's mother is on the phone with someone. Jade's sister hasn't gone inside yet. She's been standing by her car for 20 minutes. I thought about that image. Jade's sister. A woman named Petra, who I had met a dozen times, and who had always seemed to see things clearly, standing alone by her car with her phone in her hand. And you? I said. What are you doing? Standing in the parking lot calling you, Cressida said. Because I don't know if I can go in there. You don't have to go in, I said. That was never the point. A pause. What was the point? She asked. I looked out the window of my apartment. April morning. Good light. The point, I said, was that they were going to stand in front of everyone they love and be celebrated, and everyone they love was going to smile and clap and take photographs and wish them well. Without knowing, without having the chance to decide for themselves what they thought about what these two people had done, and who these two people were. I paused. I didn't take their wedding away from them. I just gave the people in that parking lot the information they deserved to have before they decided whether to celebrate. A long silence. Some of them are leaving, Cressida said quietly. I can see cars turning around. Okay, I said. Does it feel like you thought it would? I thought about that honestly. No, I said. It's quieter than I thought. What I didn't tell Cressida, what I was only just understanding myself, sitting in my apartment on that April morning, was that the feeling wasn't triumph. I had expected something closer to triumph, some burning satisfaction. What it actually felt like was something more like completion, like a story reaching its last page. Not happiness exactly, but the specific relief of being done carrying something. Cressida told me later that the wedding did happen. About half the guests who had arrived ended up going inside. The ceremony was described by the people who attended as short, functional, none of the warmth that a wedding is supposed to carry. The reception was reportedly awkward in the particular way of an event where the room is aware of something that isn't being addressed. Jade's sister, Petra, did not go inside. She drove away from the parking lot and called Jade the next day and had a conversation that I only know about through later context. What I know is that the two of them didn't speak for several months afterward. Marcus's mother sent me a letter of all things. Physical. Handwritten. It arrived about 3 weeks later. It said very little, but what it said was real. I am sorry for what my son did. I want you to know that I know it was wrong. I kept that letter. The divorce finalized in June. I moved into my apartment, the one I had chosen entirely for myself. The one with the good morning light and the bookshelf wall and the kitchen that I cooked in on Sunday mornings with music playing and nobody to perform normalcy for. I built something new. Slowly, the way things that are built properly are always built slowly. I kept the clients I'd held through everything. I took on new ones. The work that I had always been good at became the thing I poured myself into without guilt, without the low hum of a marriage that needed maintenance. I made new friends, not to replace old ones, just to find people who met the current version of me rather than the version I'd been when everything was built around someone else. I heard about Marcus and Jade occasionally through the remaining overlap of mutual people. They were still together, still married. Whether they were happy, I genuinely couldn't tell you. and I had reached the place where I genuinely didn't need to. I want to be honest with you about something before I tell you the final thing. The question I have been asked most often when I've told this story to people close to me is, was it worth it? And I've had to sit with that question because the honest answer is complicated. I don't think revenge, even the quiet, strategic documentary kind, heals the wound. I want to be clear about that. I woke up the day after that April Saturday, and I still had all the grief I had before. The loss of what I thought my marriage was. The loss of Jade, specifically. That one was its own separate category of pain. Losing the person who was supposed to be my person. That didn't get easier, because 37 people received an email. What it did do was this: it prevented a false narrative from taking hold. Because here's what would have happened without it. What almost happened in the months before the spring. Jade and Marcus would have gotten married. Their friends would have celebrated them. The story that would have calcified in the social memory of everyone who knew us would have been, Marcus and Vivienne grew apart. He found love with Jade. It was complicated, but it worked out. These things happen. Nobody's the villain. They seem happy, good for them. And I would have existed in that narrative as the woman who was left. The sad one. The one the story moved past. That narrative was a lie. And I had the truth. And the truth was mine to tell. I told it. Not by screaming, not by breaking down, not by giving anyone the satisfaction of watching me unravel. By writing clearly, documenting precisely, choosing the moment carefully, and letting the facts do what facts do when they're set in front of people who care about what's true. That was my power. I used it, and then I put it down and walked forward. Here is what I know now that I didn't know on that Tuesday when I stood in the hallway and heard my husband say my name to my best friend. I know that betrayal by two people at once, husband and closest friend, simultaneously, creates a specific kind of wound that is hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it. It isn't just loss. It's a destabilization of your own reality. Because the two people who were supposed to confirm your version of the world, who were supposed to be witnesses to your life, were both lying to you, which means all of it was uncertain. Everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you becomes a question. Surviving that requires you to become the only witness you trust. I became that witness. I documented my own life with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the people around me could no longer be trusted to hold it accurately. I became my own record keeper, my own advocate, my own source of certainty about what was real. That is not a cold way to live. It is, in fact, the most intimate way to live, because it requires knowing yourself with a precision you can only achieve when you stop outsourcing that knowledge to other people. The other thing I know is this: patience is not passivity. The months I waited were not months of doing nothing. They were months of building the conditions for a different outcome. Of making sure that when I moved from a position of complete information and legal readiness, rather than from the raw, reactive place that grief wanted to pull me toward. People will tell you to act immediately, to confront, to make noise, to let the anger out. And sometimes that is right, but sometimes, when the people who hurt you are still inside the circle of your daily life, when you share assets and a home and a future that requires untangling, the most powerful thing you can do is become very still. Let them believe they're safe. Let them plan their futures. And when the moment arrives, the right moment, the one that serves the truth most completely, step into it with everything you have prepared. Not for revenge, for truth, for the record, for everyone who deserved to know and hadn't been told. My name is Vivienne Cross. My husband cheated on me with my best friend. I waited 11 months, and on the morning of their wedding, 37 people received an email. Not because I wanted to destroy them, because I had decided in a parking garage on a Tuesday in August that the truth was mine, that I had earned it, that it deserved to be told, and that I was going to be standing up when the story was over. I'm still standing. That's the whole thing. That's the part they didn't plan for. Not the email, not the photograph, not the guests who turned their cars around in the parking lot. The part they didn't plan for was that I would still be standing, stronger than I was before they did it, building something real, on my own terms, in my own light. If someone is doing to you right now what was done to me, I want you to hear this. Your grief is valid. Your anger is valid, and neither of them has to drive the car. Take your time. Know everything before you do anything. Document. Prepare. Find the people who are unambiguously on your side. And when you're ready, when you are fully, completely, documentably ready, tell the truth. Clearly, precisely, without apology. The truth is always yours. Don't let anyone take it.